Story 1. Oubliette in silence, a final, tranquil silence the village of Caledane sat. This wasn't so remote, really only miles from his seat in Lincoln, and near enough to the sea for the nice fog, a misty translucence, a blue light. This way the place was in the morning. They had back at least one of the missing villagers, the youngest, Mina. She had come home after vanishing months before. It was a miracle. St. Martin stood over this village. People thanked him for returning the child. A strange buzzing agreed. Was there a voice that spoke from the roof of the chapel when people thanked St. Martin? That was also a miracle. Somehow the darkness was here with her, had followed Mina home. St. Martin wasn't buzzing and responding from the roof of the chapel. Mina shuddered to think of who, or rather what, it really might be. They would put her back into the asylum in Lincoln. She didn't want to go back there. Medieval, insane asylums of this realm were not fun. Mina stared out her bedroom window and wondered if she should try a different God. If God was okay with that thing sitting on the row of the chapel. Nobody could see it up there. It managed to stay well hidden from sight, but it was up there, near unrest. Mina knew it, and it made her tremble in fear. There was a boy at her window, 2 of them, boys from the village. They believed her because they had seen something awful when they stared too long at the chapel from a vantage point. Something was there that was not right. She had said so, and they had come now at dusk to ask. They had a lantern for the way home after dark. You want me to tell you what happened to me? The whole story? Mina asked them. Her audience said nothing. They had sneaked out from their cottages with that thing out there, needing to know. The risk was worth finding out what it was. It was talking to people and had done so for weeks now. Ever since Mina had first returned, strange things had happened. Now that she was back from the asylum, the strangeness had escalated. Was it dangerous? My tale is simple. Mina told them her story. She wasn't a good storyteller, but her story was true, and true stories are always good. In terror the boys fled home with their lantern blazing an orb of light. Mina stared a guy in at the chapel of the village, a vigil in the silence. In night, ever-changing, the moon and stars swing round and round, but it seems slow to man, not to others. Not to them she had gathered bare. Ah, yes, green-blue old berries, very sweet ones that grew in this primordial vale still. Some things were left over here, next to a frontier forest. The village itself was by no means remote. The whole world was simply locked amid the domains of man, encroaching where even his own foot hath not fallen. And it was a simpler, more unexplored region of a slightly quaint realm. Therefore unicorns, watar, sleek shades of the forest did remain. Those that were quiet enough here did see them. A gentle woodsman, unarmed, might see one. Unarmed was important, for a bow they knew, despot, either untamed and innocent corner, surrounded on all sides by man's farmlands and castles. They were intelligent, could speak if they chose. They lived very long lives, an old species of the world, as old as a time antediluvian, or in this case, just a girl picking berries. She tried to follow it into the dark bowers of its domain, the cool and silent forest. The trees here were ancient and untouched. She was already in the forest before, but a much younger forest where people had come and gone for thousands of years. and there were berries and game. This place was ignored. Nobody wanted to come here or had the courage. The world was still too young for this place, even now in the medieval. Go back, the voice of the creature was not human. It was a whisper, and it was feminine, but it was not a human voice. The unicorn stared at her, its presence like a cold splash of water, so surprising. It was not entirely pleasant to behold, however. Time and destruction had tainted it, and its single horn was a twisted lacern, spiraling and straight like a sword from its forehead. Its shadow was a light gray, as if it didn't entirely catch the light. Dust motes sparked around it, unable to touch it, and its eyes glimmered discreetly as it shimmered like a white veil, and was then gone. Unicorn, Mina said after it. She ate some berries then, turned to go back as it had commanded. It was already too late. She wasn't sure how fast or cruel or from what direction, but a blow struck her and flung her against a tree. Not a happy camper, T. His denizen of the domain, huge and brown, a flat face and intelligent eyes. It could eat her, but had witnessed the unicorn interacting with this human and chose to do no further harm. She might die, but it was not going to try any harder to kill her. It scooped up the basket of berries to take with it, holding it in its claws. With restraint it lumbered away, growling almost poetically, barely and massive. Mina's eyes closed. She heard none of the calls from the villagers as they searched for her. Old Seth the miller found her, and instead of returning her, he took her body home, thinking she was dead when she was not. Dead, he didn't have the heart to kill her, so he left her laying in a pit in the cellar of his cottage. Then he resumed his normal functions around the village the next day, telling nobody he had found her. Then old Seth kept Mina in his cellar, and each night he would come to see if she had died of starvation yet. He grew impatient. One day he brought in the body of Brenner, dragging the man down the steps from the pit. Mina could see part of this action. Then she heard the most awful noises, grunting and slurping, squishing noises. Something very terrible was happening. One day a chair fell into the pit from above for no apparent reason. She started to climb out, then heard all these terrible noises, the same gurgling sounds, all squishing and bumping the table that was with the chair she had used to climb out. Mina was afraid. What could it be? She peeked up and it stopped making noise. She wasn't sure what she was looking at. She gathered her courage and climbed the rest of the way out of the pit. Then she crawled weakly towards it to see what it was. A vague dread was in her heart of what it might be, so strange as it sat there on the floor, pulsing and throbbing evilly. A moment of severe terror gripped Mina, and she was speaking of what it might be before it tore her mind apart in such awfulness as what she was seeing. She said, "Eye of the pit is witness to this, as they eat the body as a larvae, then a pupy transparent, hard, translucent, shell-dry heart case, but with the glowing greenish yellow golden brown crust, soupy mess, skeleton bones inside it grows to this huge gross cocoon." But her mind did break after that, for she was running wildly around the cellar of the cottage when old Seth came home, and it began to hatch. Both humans watched in fascination as it hatched into a red wasp with white stripes. It stretched its wings, flicking embryonic substances, and then began hovering. "Not your day, not your day," it spoke to the man and the girl It looked at them, and it could speak. Its evil insect face had great vicious mandibles and merciless, wet compound eyes that dripped a black syrup. "You used to say that to me," the girl said, laughing. "Quiet," the man ordered. He felt for his keyring. They were. He all locked in down here in his cellar. He then went for his dagger, but the wasp was quicker. It tackled him, and with an insect appendage that looked oddly like a human hand, it took the dagger and stung him with it in the shoulder. The acid, use the acid, the man told the girl. She got a beaker of acid from the table with the cutting implements. She threw it onto the creature, burning it. Some of the acid got onto the man. That was fun. Mina laughed. The steam of the corrosive reaction was a cloud around its thorax. "Why won't you just die? Why won't you just die already?" The creature wondered in repetition of what the man had frequently said to the girl. She walked over and took his keyring. "Goodbye." Mina squinted playfully at him. "Help me," Seth begged. "Nobody can hear you. Nobody can hear you down here," the creature reminded him. Then it stung him. Mina started to walk past the pit. Seth gripped her ankle as the venom coursed through him. Mina swung down into the pit. Tripped. She still held the keys. Seth had a death grip on her ankle and held her there, dangling face first. His arm hung down into the darkness of the pit. Above, the creature had paralyzed him, but he was not dead, and he could still feel its attacks. The wasp started to dissect him with the dagger, and it was buzzing evilly as it did this. Then when it found the organs, it started to chew its mandibles all violently. As it ate him alive, the body jerked like a steak getting sawed by a dull steak knife. Mina felt the biting and pulling and tugging and jerking as the arm swung and thrust her into the dark. Would the hand release her ankle? It did, and she plummeted face first into the pit, and then she knew no more. When she awoke, she felt the cake of dried blood on her crown. She climbed free of the muddy pit and found that blood from the body had dried on her head. She had no mark, but the fall had restored her by taking her recent memories. She ignored the body in the dark, too disoriented to really note it. Some part of her was unconcerned for old Seth for some reason. Curiously, the wooden door had gotten smashed through with tools found around the bus. Emmett, smart enough to use tools, but not to find the keys. Maybe it was just having too much fun smashing stuff. Whatever it was, parts of her memories that made no sense. Flashes and feelings, starvation, weakness, suffering, and then something terrible down there in the darkness. Mina walked home. Story 2. Hanging Tree. My boyfriend and I decided to go down to the south for a week, hike the Great Smokies, and everything ... We rented a cozy cabin, secluded in the woods, not many people milling around. It was the end of summer, still some tourism going, but not much. We thought it would be the perfect getaway from city life and people in general. The cabin had this big 2-paneled window near the kitchen that looked out at the woods around the cabin. For some reason, there were no curtains over the window, or even a curtain rod, so we couldn't hang up towels or a bed sheet for some added privacy. We didn't like the window, but Figu read there was no harm to it. On the second morning, I was standing by the window as my boyfriend sat in front of his computer. Yes, he brought his computer to the cabin. A week away from the city did not mean a week away from technology. dot peering out the window. I noticed for the first time a long yellow rope hanging from a tree branch, about 10 or so feet away. The rope snaked down, but ended 5 or 6 feet off the ground. I hadn't noticed it before and commented on it. My boyfriend said he'd noticed it earlier, though he didn't remember seeing it the day before. Neither did I. We left tea for dinner and came back. No one around, my boyfriend said, glancing out the windshield. All the other cabins are dark. There were 2 or 3 other cabins in the area. Ours was the furthest back, and as we drove past the others, we noticed no other cars, and no lights. Must have all left, I said, smiling. We're all alone, my boyfriend grinned. Alone? In the woods. He made a fake ghost sound, and I just ignored him, closing the car door and walking down the ramp to our cabin door. Later that day, about 8:30 p.m., I sat in front of my own laptop. A 3-lamp chandelier hung over tea table. It flickered once, then stopped. My boyfriend didn't even notice. 10 minutes later, the light flickered again, and the bulb died. 2 more to go, my boyfriend jokingly commented. I gave him a weak smile and went back to my screen. The light flickered again. Maybe we have too many plugs in, I said. Shouldn't cause an issue. Doesn't matter, my boyfriend shrugged. Busy playing his video game, I went back to typing. Since it was dark out and we had lights inside, I couldn't see anything out the window, even though I was facing it. Anyone standing up beside it, though, could look in and see us. We'd never noticed them because of the glare. But for one moment, I was sure I saw something move. Must be my own reflection, ought, but knew it didn't make any sense. I hadn't shifted enough to cause a streaking reflection. The second light bulb flickered. We should do something about that, I said, still shaken from the streaking reflection, even though I hadn't told my boyfriend about it. It's just a light bulb, he said absent-mindedly. It could go out. Maybe all 3 could. Lines give her a call tomorrow. Her was the cabin owner, a nice older lady named Robin. He went back to his game, and I went back to typing. There was a knock at the front door. Who the hell is that, my boyfriend grumbled, getting up from his seat. Don't open it, I said, grabbing his arm. The light bulb flickered. Another knock. Maybe it's Robin, he said. At 9 o'clock at night, he shrugged and walked down the hall to the front door. Don't, I said again, grabbing a pen, as if I'd be able to stab anyone with it. The door opened. I peeked over my boyfriend's shoulder. A man long, scraggly hair and an oversized coat stood on the front porch. He held a lantern flashlight in his right hand, the beam hitting the ground. Evening, he said. I was just walking round here, heard some noises. I come from up the road, got a cabin of my own. There. What kind of noise? My boyfriend asked. Not sure, but thought I'd come up and check. We didn't hear anything, I said. Well, the man glanced over my boyfriend's shoulder at me. I noticed one of his eyes was missing. Could be the bears, he grinned. 3 teeth missing. They've been prowling round here the past week. We'll let you know if we hear or see anything, my boyfriend said. The man gave a single nod and stepped away. His dirty yellow nylon coat crinkled as he walked off. He's creepy, I said, giving the door a little tug, even though my boyfriend had already shut and locked it. He was already at his seat, back facing that dark, open window. The light flickered again. Yeah, well, at least we know we're not alone if there actually is anything out there. Maybe he's the only thing that's out there, I said. Scared, my boyfriend, Chuck, called, making those fake ghost sounds again. I threw my pen at him. He laughed, catching it and laying it on the table. Maybe we should go out there and look around. Might be a demon or something. You re not funny. And you're not scared, he grinned. That flickering light again. The second bulb went out. Down the one. He grumbled, the door sliding loud against the wooden floor as he got up. Oh, check the chandelier. Might be some bulbs around here somewhere, he said, moving to open a few cupboards and drawers. I think I saw one downstairs. Actually, I said, and that Losit, my boyfriend, left me to go downstairs. Turning on the stairway light, the chandelier flickered again. Get 3. If you can find them, I call down. I think the third's about to go. Oh, he yelled something back, then cursed. You okay? Stubbed my toe. He yelled up. He came back up a minute later. Didn't find any. I'll just call her in the morning. Or we can go out and get some tomorrow. That's the first thing we're doing then, I said. Getting bulbs. I don't want to spend the rest of the week in the dark. Wait. Did you see that? He said. He was moving to sit down, then jumped up, staring out the window. I just saw something streak by. What something? I said, standing up slowly. I grabbed the pen again. I don't know, but it was yellow. I think it shot by the window. Maybe a bear, I said, knowing it wasn't true. He shook his head. Not big enough, unless it was a small bear, and way too fast. There's something out there. I'm going, to check. Are you crazy? I said, grabbing his arm. Don't go out there. You don't even have a flashlight. Come on, he said. I'll take a quick look, then come right in. No, don't. 2 minutes, I promise. He gave me a quick kiss and went back downstairs to the sliding door that led right out to the backwoods. I heard the door creak open, and with my pen in hand, I went down the stairs and watched by the door. His white shirt was bright in the darkness. I could just see that rope dangling from the tree. I don't see anything, I call. Ed out. Come back in. He waved me silent, and he stood looking around, only his head moving. I noticed his back was really tense. Samuel, I said, my voice barely carrying. He waved me quiet again, then hurried back inside. I think I saw something. See what? I didn't see anything. Not sure, he said, quickly locking the door and shutting the curtain. Haynes, did you bring in my hunting knife from the car? I shook my head. Where are my keys? He said, taking the stairs up to it at a time. On the table, I said, right as he grabbed them. Watch him. Why back, he said, slipping out the front door, but stay inside. He ran up the ramp to the car, opening the trunk. He rummaged for a minute as I glanced around, looking for any movement. Hurry up, I said. Coming, he said as he slammed down the trunk and locked the car. He was inside in less than a minute, locking the door and giving it a tug of his own. Why don't we stay in for the rest of the night, he said, a light sheen over his face. Make some tea and go to bed early. I'll go warm up some water now. He absent-mindedly nodded as he shut down his computer and went to charge. Your phone charged, he called out from the bedroom. The battery's dying, I think. Where's your charger, then? He said. The third light bulb went out then. All the other lights in the cabin "In my suitcase," I said. Samuel came out from the bedroom, the glow of my phone in his hand. "How about we forget that tea and just go to bed?" I quickly shut off the stove. Indeed, we slipped into bed, snuggling deep into the blankets. "We'll get up early," I said, "and head into town for the day. It'll be nice to see more people again." "Yeah," he said. A minute later, I heard him breathing softly. "You asleep yet?" I said. No answer but the light breathing. I lay awake for the next 2 hours, listening to the windows creaking. When I woke up the next morning, Samuel was still asleep. I slid out from under the blankets, glad for the bright sunshine coming in through that big open window. I grabbed a bowl of cereal and milk and set the coffee pot. I figured the smell of coffee would wake Samuel and we would get going to town. The sound of cereal crunching in my head, I meandered over to the window. Glancing out, the bowl shattered at my feet. Tea. Milk sloshing everywhere. "What's going on?" Samuel said, running out from the bedroom. I only pointed out the window. "What's there?" he said, his eyes wide, as he came up behind me. Hanging from a tree was a second yellow rope, and right beside it, a third one. From the third one hung the creepy visitor from last night, and right beside him stood a little boy in a yellow coat. I blinked, and he was gone. "You saw him right," I said. Samuel opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, there was a knock at the front door. St. Aura 3, Vitreous, in mid-July of 1991, when Sam was 6 years old. He was holding his mother's hand as they walked barefoot across the baking hot asphalt of the neighborhood pool's parking lot. He had his other arm through the hole of his inflatable black inner tube and was gazing off at an angle tangential to the sun. Something was bothering him, and had been ever since school let out the month prior. Sam refrained from telling his mother about it, and his father was not exactly a prime source of emotional comfort because he was afraid she would think he was going crazy. The passage of time for tea. He young always seems so much slower, and for an adult, even in the happiest of days. With this secret weighing on Sam's heart, the past month had felt like an eternity. Finally, he screwed up the courage to speak. "Mom, I've got to tell you something." She looked down at him, a kind but apprehensive smile spreading across her face. She knew he was a good boy, but that was rarely a good way for your child to start the conversation. "Go ahead, sweetie. Sometimes I see things like some kind of squirmy bugs," Sam said. "I don't think they're really there. I can kinda see through them, and they run away when I try to look straight at them, but they're always there. I think they might be inside my eyes." Her smile widened, and she looked off to the side so as to not let him see it, since this seemed to be a serious issue for him. So many nonsensical worries turned into serious issues for Sam, a trait he likely inherited from her. Most of his issues tended toward the monster in the closet category, a battle she had finally won through countless subsequent nights in which he was not eaten by a grue. So she thought something with an actual medical explanation should be easily put right. I used to get those sometimes. Lots of people do. Actually, I know they look weird, like squiggly little worms or something, but they're really just harmless little specks in your eyes that people call floaters. They're not alive, and they can't hurt you. They come and go. It's no big deal. She ruffled Sam's hair as they approached the girl guarding the entrance to the pool and waved their membership cards. "For entrance, Sam spent the day doing flips underwater and sometimes just bobbing along the surface of the pool in his black rubber inner tube. He slowly began to put the visions, what his mother had called floaters, out of his mind. She had seen them too, which alone would have taken most of their menace away from T.H.M., even if they weren't harmless like she promised they were. He sometimes wondered if his parents understood how much less scary those closet monsters would have been for him if they had only acknowledged T.H.E. monsters' existence. Knowing you're alone with horrors that only you can see is always the worst part. But if Mom sees the worms and still says everything's fine, then it must be, he thought to himself. He found it somewhat odd that she mentioned the worms, but not the spiders or the way they scream when you try to fall asleep. But he supposed it went without saying. Sam stretched out across the tube and let himself float. Story 4. My students are disappearing. My name is Oliver Strick. I'm a 52-year-old biology teacher from a small town in northeastern Nebraska, and I have been for almost 14 years. I'll be the first to admit that lecturing to a bunch of uninterested high school students wasn't what I had planned to do after getting my master's degree in medical biology, but it covers the rent of my 500-square-foot townhouse. Plus, the seasonal work gives me some time to pick up other odd jobs here and there during the off-seasons. But I am sure you don't want to listen to me ramble on about my day-to-day life, and that's not what I'm here to write about. I'm writing this because strange things are going on that no amount of schoolwork or experience has prepared me for. Friday was the day it all began. My co-worker, Joe, was sitting in the teacher's lounge after I had just finished with my third class of the day, finally taking my conference hour. He was sitting on one of the room's many flimsy plastic chairs, grading papers, and nursing what I suppose was his fourth cup of coffee. How's the prep for testing coming, Ollie? Joe inquired, referring to the upcoming finals. He always called me Ollie despite my attempts to deter him, and at this point, I didn't even bother fighting with him over it. Joe's the school's photography teacher of 7 years so far. Honestly, I thought he would have given up on this little town years ago to move to a big city better fitting his personality. Not bad, but you lines never believe the excuses I'm getting this year. At this point, I can't tell if their excuses are getting better or worse as the years go by, I joked. Although I don't think he ever really got the same treatment as us core subject teachers did. He did his best to be as empathetic as possible. Well, speaking of students, as if we aren't always, I heard from a little birdie that there's a new kid that'll be starting school next week. Yeah, I got an email about him earlier this week. It's some kid from the coast, apparently. He'll be in my first your class, really, this late in the school year. I thought it might have just been a rumor, Joe admitted, leaning back in his chair. I smiled weakly, half of me excited for a fresh face in this ocean of familiar and a half already preparing for how much this boy's mere presence was going to stir the pot. Yet, despite my previous anticipation and concern, when Monday rolled around, it was the same routine as always. Get up, get dressed, and get to school before the first student, who was always Laura, could zombie walk into class. I had almost forgotten about the new kid until just as the bell rang, a black-haired boy, notably in a suit, came striding into the class like he owned the place. Immediately recognizing that this must be the infamous transfer, I stood up from my desk and made my way over to the front of the room where he was waiting for me expectantly, almost like he had done this before. "Good morning, class. I hope you all had a good weekend. I'd like you to meet David. He's your new classmate, and I expect you all to treat him with the hospitality I expect from this class." I then turned my focus to David. "Well, is there anything you'd like to share about why ourself?" I prompted, hoping just as much as the students that he would delay the class's start. But my hopes were short-lived. David was silent, so completely silent that we all quickly fell under a blanket of awkwardness, and I rushed to fix what I had invoked. Clearly, David wasn't ready to handle all the attention. I would have felt bad for the kid if his glaring dark brown eyes weren't cutting into me like a knife. "Well, that's all right. You don't have to. You can go take a seat now, and we'll begin class." And so David gave me a quick look and started walking down one of the rows of desks, only to stop at Laura's desk, the first in class, and he just stared at her. Laura was a bit of a loner, probably the reason she was always in class first, and it seemed she was keeping her head down like a scolded puppy in an attempt to act like she hadn't noticed the boy standing beside her. I opened my mouth to tell Davy that there were other empty desks, and she eventually looked up at him and, without a pause, gathered her things, got up, and walked away with her face as straight as a professional poker player. It was odd, almost automated. But David and Laura both now each had seats, and I wasn't about to make a big deal out of it. So I began the day's lesson. It was almost 15 minutes into the hour when I got a tingling feeling I was being watched. Some of you may be thinking, but you're a teacher. Of course, you're being watched, and yes, I'm being watched the majority of my day. But not like this. I found confirmation for the shiver wing down my spine when I looked across the sea of students and found David was staring at me, and I mean staring. Not like the kid was off in dreamland or high. I mean he was staring at me wide-eyed and blinky. Following my paces from one side of the room to the next, completely still. It was like he wasn't hearing me at all, and at that moment I felt like I wasn't seeing a student. I was seeing a predator staring down his prey. This continued throughout the entire hour. I was still shaken up and confused by the time class ended and the afternoon came around, where I found myself sitting across from Joe, he in the lounge. This time it was me nursing a cup of coffee. I was unnerved enough to even tell Joe about the oddness of it all. He sat and listened to me for a bit, nodding his head every once and a while until I eventually ended my tangent. "Wow, that is a bit crazy. I seriously don't know what to tell you, Ole." Joe eventually responded, "You're oh, very helpful." I sighed with a thick, sarcastic tone, but still talking to someone made me feel a bit better about the incident. At least it did until Tuesday. Laura disappeared. Laura was one of the only constants in my first class of the day. In fact, by the near end of the year, she didn't have a single tardy on her record, rather yet an absence. At first, when she wasn't there, I figured she must have had something come up to break her streak, and when class started I was ready to mark her absent. But I couldn't. According to the computer, there was no Laura on record. Still, I made excuses, and he put this off as a glitch, then ran my eyes again over the crowd of students. Then my eyes landed on the boy in a black suit, David. Yet instead of sitting Laura's empty seat like yesterday, today, he sat at Adam's desk, the big guy who made sure everybody knew he was captain of the wrestling team, not someone you would want to mess around with. But instead of sitting in his ordinary seat by the window, Adam was now cowering at a desk in the back of the room, and he looked traumatized, head down, arms holding one another, feet firmly planted. I got up to ask if he was all right, but the moment I did, David shot his eyes up to me and glared with a smirk on his face, forcing me back into my desk chair. I honestly can't explain why, but when our eyes met, it was like I had no control over my body, like I was some sort of puppet on a string, and yet I was calm, like the world's problems had just vanished. So I did what any rational person would do in my situation. I finished taking attendance, and I started class under the watchful eyes of David. By Wednesday, both Laura and Adam were gone, and David took the seat of a girl named Lily, and even if I hadn't fully put everything together yet, I knew that was probably going to be the last time I saw Lily. I was getting more and more anxious, and I confided in Joe once again. However, to my disappointment, Joe met me with confusion rather than understanding. "Who are you talking about?" Joe questioned with raised eyebrows. "Laura, I told you about her and that new kid Monday, Joe." "Sorry, and I just don't remember you mentioning her. That was Wednesday. The earliest student, Laura, was Tuesday. Adam, the captain of the wrestling team, was Wednesday. Lily, an advanced 8th grader who took classes at the high school, was Thursday. Stephen, a quiet kid who sat right behind me playing video games on his DS constantly, probably why he had glasses thicker than bulletproof glass, was Friday. These were all kids, my students, that had vanished sometime during the school day. The only thing they had in common was giving up their seat to David. Even more curious is that the other kids don't even seem to recognize that people are missing. I've asked them several times if anyone knows where any of the missing are, and all they tell me is that they don't know anybody by those names in class. You're probably asking yourself now, why haven't the parents called the school? Why haven't you gone to the police? What are you doing blaming some little kid when there's a maniac on the loose? Well, the answer is simple. Nobody remembers them but me. Lily has an older brother whom I questioned upon her disappearance, and he told me he never even had a sister. Hans. I don't know what to do anymore, and as each day passes by, the terror in my veins begins to build that I will be the next person forgotten. So if anyone out there can tell me what's going on or have theories about how this is happening, I'm always here. And one last thing, don't give up your seat to a kid in a suit. You never know who or what it could actually be. Story 5, Devil's Hole Cave, Nathaniel H. Jackson's Journal, November 11th, 1911. I had never intended on venturing into that cave. That cave where no one ever dared to go near. I remember when I was a child how my friends and I would play around the property border. Back then, the cave was on a plot of land that belonged to my uncle. He did not let anyone trespass, not even his own family. He hated his brother, my father, and didn't do anything with the 200 acres until he died. Naturally, All of the land was an untamed wilderness when my uncle died. My parents had already been gone a long time, being that I was the eldest in my bloodline. The property went to me. Whether my uncle wanted me to have it or not, I will never know. With the inheritance from my father, I had a lovely estate built on the property, and I am in the midst of cleaning up the land. Considering I don't need too much space, I am also in the process of selling parts of the land I have no trouble doing so. The property, as it turns out, is quite pleasant with a bit of grooming. The cave is the only exception. I cannot determine whether they are wolves or coyotes, that they do pose a threat. There is also the reason I began to investigate the cave in the first place. There is some sort of creature living in the cave. While there is probably a very logical explanation for Hat is in there, the legend behind it goes back several decades. During the war, a group of Confederate soldiers marched through the territory which I own today. They found the cave and decided to camp there for the night. One man, who suffered from somnambulism, walked deep into the cavern while still asleep. He walked right up to a drop-off in the cave and fell about 200 feet. When the other men woke the next morning, they did not find their friend and went looking for him in the cave. When they came to the drop-off, they heard what they believed to be the voice of Satan himself. I have heard and told this scary story many times. It has never affected me the way it does now. While the wild dogs are a problem, the legend also scares off potential buyers. I thought it in my best interest to find out what is in that cave and drive it out. I have gathered some rope a little more than 200 feet, some flares, an oil lamp, and my pack to carry all in. Finally, I shall bring my father's rifle, which I have only ever used on quails, and hope that it will be enough to protect me against any wild hounds. I will discover what exactly lurks in the cave first thing tomorrow morning. November 12, 1911. It is difficult to write, for my hand is still shaking and my heart has not stopped racing. I did in fact encounter a malevolent being in the cave. I cannot say what I saw, for in reality I saw nothing, but I fear I will never again be truly at peace after today's venture. I had left the house this morning at around 5 o'clock and had taken the automobile as close as I could get it to where the cave was. The vehicle could not drive over the brush, so I set out on foot. From there, I was only about a mile away from the cave. As I was on my way, I realized what an effort it would take to make this land attractive to buyers. Several tall, dead trees are scattered across the land and refuse to fall. Their grotesque branches cast a grim feel over the land. The grass is up to my midriff, and the insects are really quite terrible. I told myself that if I did not find anything remarkable about the cave that day, then I would have orgied about the land around it entirely. I made it to the cave unscathed, but still annoyed at the swarm of bugs I had met on my journey. There were less bugs around the cave, which I was thankful for. It was still early in the morning, but I wanted to get home as soon as possible. With relative precaution, I entered the cave. The mouth of the cave was a bit of a squeeze, but I am somewhat slim and was able to maneuver my way through. As I went deeper into the cave, the ground slowly changed from rough salt to hard stone, and the walls grew further apart. I did not need my MP at first, for the light of the rising sun reached deep into the cave. There were no stalactites to worry about, and the roof of the cavern was about 8 feet up. I was beginning to feel a little disappointed. This legendary cave did not seem to have any significance at all. There was no light in the area ahead, so I picked up a small rock and threw it. To my surprise, I did not hear it land 500 as soon as I thought it would. Instead, I heard it impact very far away. My heart began to thump with excitement. I lit the oil lamp with a match and walked forward. Sure enough, just like in the old story, a steep cliff lied before me. I am not afraid of heights, but I did not want to fall into the abyss where no one would ever find me. I placed the lamp on the floor and lay myself flat on my stomach. I inched forward to get a better look at what was down there. I peeked my head over the edge to look down. It was pitch black. I would need to climb down. With the tools I had brought, I hammered cleats into the stone floor and fastened my rope to them. I began to descend. I held my lamp in one hand and gripped the strong cord with the other. My pack held the flares and the rifle. For about 5 minutes I steadily lowered myself down into the darkness. I listened for any noise from below, but there was nothing. As I delved deeper, I began to wonder how facile it would be to return to the surface. When the bottom of my boot touched the ground, I let out a sigh of relief. My lamp was still lit, and the rope was still tethered to the surface. I looked around a good bit and walked forward. It was as though I was walking through an empty field at night. The air round me felt almost open, and I could have sworn I felt a faint breeze. However, the ground was barren as a tile floor, and the silence was quite ominous. My brief amazement had distracted me. I really should have used some sort of marking system. When I was finally struck with reality, I found myself lost in the nothingness. A slight panic overcame me as I looked around, unable to determine which direction I had come from. I wandered in the vacuum and the silence, feeling like a helpless toddler. It was then that I stumbled upon the notebook. I had felt something under my shoe and retraced my steps to find a small leather journal. I picked it up and held it close to my lamp. The cover read one name, Daniel Roderick. I thumbed through a couple of pages and read one of the entries near the middle. June 17th, 1862. I had to see the doctor today. He told me I got somnambulism. I don't know what he meant at first, but he told me it's just a fancy word for sleepwalking. I don't need a doc to tell me I've been sleepwalking. I've been doing it since I was a kid, and the DOC wants me to take these special pills to stay asleep. I gotta pack a whole bunch before I leave tomorrow. I froze after reading that entry and closed the notebook. I had just found the journal of a man who sleepwalks in a cave where a similar man is said to have died. As I stood there, in the midst of the nothingness, I heard the noise that will haunt me for as long as I live. At that very moment, there came a low hissing sound. I have never been to the Arctic Circle, yet I felt my blood turn as cold as the ocean water that runs through it. A shiver ran down my spine, and I nearly dropped the lamp from my trembling hand. Clutching the notebook and my oil lamp, I ran. I ran as far as I could from the noise, but it did not cease. The hissing only grew louder and louder. I was looking straight ahead as I sprinted, not daring to look behind me. I was so blinded by genuine terror that I did not see the rough stone wall as I barreled into it. The force of the impact was so great that I shattered my lamp into 1,000 tiny pieces and shards of glass. I hit my head rather hard on the wall, but stood up immediately. Complete darkness. I put my hands to the wall and frantically walked parallel to it. Moving to the right, I thought my heart would give out when I finally felt the familiar, coarse feel of my rope. I took a moment to steady myself, for I was breathing heavier than I ever had before. When my breathing calmed, I realized that it was completely silent once more. I let out a small laugh, unsure if it was a laugh of relief or hysteria. Still clutching the rope with my right hand, I turned and put my back against the wall. My eyes might have been just as useful closed. There was only black. I stared into the darkness, my breathing now having gone almost silent. I could have turned around at any moment and ascend back into sanity. However, an unknown force kept me staring into the nothingness, expecting something more. Something right in front of me began to hiss. This hissing was the most horrifyingly vile sound to ever enter my mind. Whatever was before me was large and would strike fear into death itself. How I got out of that treacherous cavern is beyond my understanding. My memory of escape is smeared by the sound of that demon. That monstrous entity should have finished me off right then and there in that cave with my back against the wall. However, I came home today knowing that that beast wanted me to live in fear for trying to exploit it. In the end, letting me live was the greatest torment that the monster could have bestowed upon me. It is now my curse to live with the memory of what the devil itself sounds like. Story 6. Are you alone? This is the story of one boy's suffering, one boy's suffering that was with him from the beginning, that gripped at him ever tighter, until he could no longer escape it. One boy's suffering that left him robbed of himself, forever changed by the events that overwhelmed him. That boy is me, or rather, it used to be me. As a child, I never really had many friends. While growing up, I always seemed to move from one already established group of friends to the next. I was constantly harassed at school, always singled out as a bullying target because nobody really wanted me. Nobody valued the friendship I had to offer, nor did they give me a chance to be accepted. Because of this, I was always an angry child, and I'd constantly be involved in schoolyard fights because others seemed to find joy in hurting me, and as a result I'd always bear injuries from having no help when the bullies and their equally shitty friends swarmed me. Eventually, my teachers grew sick and tired of trying to deal with my problems and just let the bullies have their way. My parents were also just as frustrated with trying to help me to escape the torment. I always tried to explain that it wasn't my fault, that all the other students just seemed to despise me on sight, but it never got through to them. Eventually, I stopped trying and gave up on them. At about age 13, my parents had completely lost faith in me. They didn't care anymore, with nobody to communicate my problems to. I became extremely reclusive and developed a reputation as being a hermit. For the next 3 years, I shut myself off from the world as much as humanly possible, enduring the constant torment of the outside world and ignoring the sick and over-exaggerated tales about me. At age 16, there was the arrival of something else, something worse. I was on my way home from school in the dim light of the late afternoon, since I always made it a point to go home the long way so as to avoid the other students and prolonged going home to my indifferent parents. I wasn't too far from home, maybe a block or two away, when I noticed a pale glow in the middle of an empty street. My neighborhood, W, as always full of weird people doing dumb things, so I paid no attention to it and kept walking. As I got closer to the source of the odd glow, I could make out the form of a girl. Once I could see her properly, all the lights in the area suddenly blacked out. The only thing that assured me I hadn't been blinded was the lasting pale glow of the girl standing perfectly still in the street, enveloped in shadow. Even the faint light of the setting sun had somehow been extinguished. Before I could even begin to panic, I heard the words, "Are you alone?" At that I began to run. I couldn't see where I was going, or even if I was going anywhere at all. All I know is eventually I turned to see what was behind me. If anything, I didn't like what I saw. "Are you alone?" said the girl who was now standing right in front of my face. She looked to be about 14, and she wore clothes like some sort of maiden from the 1700s. She had a face full of innocence, and spoke her words softly. I slowly gathered the strength to answer her, and I noticed my watch was frozen, so there was no way for me to know how much time had elapsed. "Why, yes," I stuttered unsurely. At this point I could only think I was hallucinating or about to die. "Can we be friends?" she said next, leaving me speechless a while longer. Fear gripped at me, and I could feel the strain in my throat. I was stuttering for the words, any words, to break this sickening and ungodly silence. After a while I was at the stage where I felt I needed to get this, whatever this was, over with. "Yes," I answered bleakly as I fell to the floor, having exerted the last of my willpower. The girl seemed amused. Her eyes seemed full of content, and she had a small smile. Seeing this both relieved and unnerved me simultaneously. I don't know quite how to describe it. Almost immediately after, the girl's clothes began to move of their own accord. Her scarf-like wrapping flowed as though in a tornado, her long dress blowing in a breeze of hollow, empty nothingness, since the air was still. Her hair began moving slowly, and the innocence seemed to disappear from her eyes. She opened her mouth slightly, and her eyes darkened until they were completely engulfed in the shadows that surrounded us. Suddenly I began to feel pain, running up and down, all through, about my body. I was gripped by the shock waves of torture that I was feeling and couldn't move. This continued until I passed out. When I came to, I was lying in the street. I immediately got up and was frantically searching for the girl, but there was no trace of her. The time was 1:50 a.m. It took longer than it should have for me to realize the intense pain was gone. When I finally got home, I decided to just sleep for another day at school and leave the thoughts I was having until morning. I was not granted that luxury, however. The little sleep I did get was haunted. Why? Strange nightmares, not of the girl, but of me being in pain, the same intense pain I had felt earlier. The end of the nightmares was much worse. The girl, she was there with her innocent guys haunting my very dreams. Then I woke up. Rather anticlimactically, I was thankful for that, at least. As days turned to weeks, it seemed that all I could focus on was the girl. She appeared at the end of my nightly dreams and was more aggressive each time. Many of the people at school wouldn't acknowledge me. They never spoke to me or of me again. having been bullied all of my school life. This was a strange feeling. My family also wouldn't speak to me. My mother said it was like I emanated a strange aura that chilled her very soul. I knew only one thing, and that was what was responsible. Her. I'd never told anyone about her. I knew I'd be ridiculed at school as always, and my parents would have sent me to a mental hospital. I kept quiet about her for my own safety. She had become my secret obsession. I even took to calling her the outcast maiden, a name I couldn't seem to get out of my head, and one that I thought fit perfectly. At this point I was completely alone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worrying about others and what they would do to me. Instead, I felt truly afraid, and I couldn't enjoy my newfound freedom because this was far worse. Finally, I gave up. I had no further reason to stay in this dead town, living in constant fear, trying to live normally with my schoolwork suffering and my lack of any peace. I had to leave in the hope that I could escape or maybe find someone out there who knew what was happening. Anything was better than this. While my parents slept in the early hours of the morning, I took all the money I could find, including my parents' cards, and left for the train station. I was so distracted with not knowing where I was going or what to do that I was unable to process in my mind a terrible scenario that by now I should have been familiar with. I only have half an hour to get there before the train leaves, I thought to myself, completely unaware that all the street lights had blacked out. By the time I'd seen the pale glow amid the endless blackness, I was so stressed and full of rage that I no longer feared her. I hated her, and I was prepared to act. "What the fuck are you? What the fuck do you want with me?" I shouted forcefully into the darkness towards her. She began to playfully giggle, and I took a few large steps back. She began moving towards me, and my false, anger-induced courage had dissipated, and yet again I was frozen with fear. Her legs remained deathly still as her form drifted towards me. She was rigged HD in front of me again, smiling that deceitfully innocent smile. I remembered the pain from last time, and I started trembling. And as she put an icy finger to my lips, I passed out after all. Keening this second time, it was midday. There were a few people on the street and some cars driving by. Nothing was unusual aside from me regaining consciousness at the side of the road. Nobody had noticed me there, nor did anyone look as I got up. As I traveled through the streets, I couldn't feel the ground beneath my feet. Upon looking down, I noticed my legs weren't moving, that I appeared to float as she did. Upon closer inspection of my body, I saw that I was pale and discolored. No matter where I went, nobody noticed me. Nobody could hear me, it seemed. I wrote down messages like "hello" and "I'm here," but nobody seemed to be able to see them. Nobody could feel my presence. Not my parents, not my fellow students, not anybody. As I began to lose hope, she appeared again. This time there were no hostilities. "The cruel cannot find us, so it's nice," she exclaimed energetically. She then told me everything. Several others appeared, all of them like me, and I learned that our outcast maiden feeds on suffering, eats the unhappiness of humans. A few die as I feed, but most can become my friends. She continued, "The cruelty of humanity can harm us no further, and only those who are suffering, angry, keeping secrets, or alone the tortured and guilty can hear our call. and our role is to find suitable candidates for her meals and s. Oh, I have written this not as a warning, but to ease you in, to prepare you for your fate. For if you are able to read this, the writings I have created, then we already know your truth, as does our maiden, even if you do not. Many of us are initially in denial. Be not afraid, and do not resist. Embrace the truth. You will be in good, safe hands amongst us. She will be with you soon. Story 7. Keep the mask on. My father was not a famous man, but he should have been. He was the first person to break ground on that archaeology dig in Egypt you didn't hear about. I go to see him once a week now. I tell him how things at home are, and he just sits there and rocks back and forth in his beige sleeveless jacket. He hasn't said anything since the first day he was here. Before the doctors began pumping the drugs into him that make him drool on himself. I'll not soon forget what he said. He looked at me, straining against the straight jacket that he'd willingly stepped into. He winced as they tightened it. He looked dead into my eyes, and I returned the gaze. I didn't know yet. I thought he'd acted the way he did unprovoked. I didn't know why he practically destroyed our house in a sudden fit of rage, screaming, "Where are you?" at the top of his lungs. I didn't know why he thrown my mother down a flight of stairs and paralyzed her from the neck down. But I now sat next to a broken mess of a man. Dried tears dotted my cheeks, and I looked at the man I thought was a monster and asked him why. He glanced up to me with hot, sad brown eyes and smiled. It took all I had not to punch him his already swollen face. He simply said, "Top drawer, right side," before he looked back to the floor and closed his eyes. That was the last time he spoke to me. I immediately rushed home. I parked the car and ran up the stairs and down the hall to my father's study. I tried the knob and, as usual, it was locked. I was so angry. Before I knew it, I had broken the door down in 3 kicks. I strode to his desk and opened the drawer he had identified. It was empty save for a large manila folder. I ripped it open and poured the contents on the desk, which consisted of a folder full of ruffled pages and a small post-it note. I plucked up the post-it and read it aloud. For 53421, I set it aside and picked up the folder. I immediately recognized my father's handwriting. I opened the folder and laid the pages out on the table. They were wrinkled, smudged, and horribly frayed. But I sat down and began reading. From the best I could tell, he had began writing these the day after he got home from the dig. He began, "Just got home today." I decided to start this journal after a recommendation from a friend. Not really sure how to go about this, I brought back a birthday present for my 16-year-old son. It's a small copper plate about 3 inches square. Found it just outside the dig site. Has a small hole punched at the top. Maybe he could put it on a necklace. Lots of strange carvings on it. They don't seem to be a language. Small picture of a human figure etched in as well. It seems to be wearing a mask or helmet. I hope he likes it. That was all that was on the first page. I almost smiled at my dad's writing style. Choppy, brief, and informal, just like Dad, but I paused for a moment. My birthday was still a few days away, and I had heard nothing about this gift. I skipped to the next entry, which was dated to be the following day. long night. Couldn't seem to get to sleep. I swear I heard a voice last night. Couldn't make out what it said, just a whispering from down the hall. Maybe Josh was up late. I'll ask today. That piqued my attention. I remember him asking if I had been up late, but I know I had been asleep. Odd. I read on to the next day. I had to write this down. No one will believe me if I don't. The whispering came back last night. His time I heard what it said. Give it back. That's all it said. Over and over. I looked out the door to the hallway and I'd swear I saw someone there. A short figure, hunched over. Heard a raspy breathy NG. Kept saying, give it back, give it back. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Had my father gone crazy overnight? I remember him behaving oddly the next morning, but I was in such a hurry for school, I thought nothing of it. I flipped to the next page and immediately noticed a difference. The handwriting was smudged, scratchy, and uneven. Almost like it had been written in a hurry. It said, had my friend Buddy translate the words on the gift. He was confused by it, said it was in Latin. Why did we find Latin lettering in an Egyptian dig? Buddy said it read Larvumbra at the top and Vignette everywhere else. When I asked him what it meant, he looked at me and said mask shadow. He will come. I asked him what that meant. He wouldn't tell me. I'll look it up tonight. I looked at the date. It was the day before he'd gone mad. Unfortunately, it was also the last entry. Exhausted from the long day, I sat down in my dad's chair. I stacked the rest of the papers and began to slide them back into the envelope when I noticed the sticky note I had set aside. I plucked it back up and read it again. For 5-3 for 2-1, I thought for a moment. Then, like a bolt of inspiration, I remembered my dad always kept a combination-locked safe in the basement. I grabbed the sticky note and ran downstairs. I arrived at the small, stocky safe and quickly dialed in the 3 numbers that do or clicked, and I swung it open. There, in the middle of the safe, sitting upon a small handkerchief, was what appeared to be a small piece of copper, about as big as a playing card. I slowly reached in to pick it up. As my fingers brushed the bitingly cold copper, I felt a chill run up my fingers, up my arm, and down my spine. The room seemed to grow shockingly cold, and the lights flickered and glowed. The whole house seemed to be whispering, talking. A voice was resonating from the walls. A foul, wispy voice, an angry voice. At first I couldn't quite make out what it was saying, but it steadily grew louder and louder until I had to cover my ears in pain. Give IT back. The voice boomed so loud the windows rattled, and the furniture seemed to be vibrating at the sound of it. Beneath the echoing din, I heard the light tapping. I forced myself to look up, and at the end of the hall I saw a dark figure. It was a short, hunched-over figure, no taller than 5 feet high. It wore a dark hood and robe, so I could not see any distinguishable features, except for what was making the tapping sound. A long, thin arm was extended from the figure. The skin was a sickly greenish-gray and appeared to be peeling back and falling off the bones. At the end of the gaunt arm was a horrifically large hand with thin fingers and claws. The booming voice stopped, but the horrible hand kept tapping the concrete wall. The lights flickered again, and I was plunged into momentary darkness. In the inky blackness, I heard what sounded like a shallow, raspy breathing getting closer and closer. The lights flashed back on, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw the figure now loom over me. The hand had seemingly disappeared back under the black robe. I tried to steady my breathing, and that's when I noticed the smell. Like any boa, I had been around a few dead animals, dead birds, rats, and even an opossum or two, but this smell was easily far worse than anything I had ever inhaled. It burnt my nostrils and made my eyes water. I hurriedly scooted away from the figure that stood over me. It made no move to stop me, but seemed to watch me scurry across the linoleum. With my back against the wall, I stood myself up. For what seemed like hours, we stared at each other. The figure would occasionally tilt its head in what seemed to be curiosity, but as I could not see its face, I couldn't be sure. I heard a rustling sound coming from beneath the creature's cloak. As I watched, horrified, the ghastly emerged from the folds of his robe, this time accompanied by another. With slow, deliberate movements, the arms reached to where I assumed the creature's head was, and slowly pulled back the hood. The light fell upon the creature's brow to reveal not a face, but a huge, clunky copper mask. The mask seemed to be bolted and spot-welded onto the figure's head. There were no apparent orifices except for 2 holes where the eyes would be, and their I saw, tearing back at me, 2 dreadful eyes. They were completely white, with a sort of pus or dew at the edges. The eyes blinked, and more of the white pus oozed out of the corners. The horrible sight, combined with the smell, was enough to make me gag, and I wretched upon the floor. The lights emitted a buzzing sound and soon flashed off again. I sat in the dark for what seemed like several minutes, all the while hearing the raspy breathing grow louder and louder. The lights began to flicker violently, so I only caught occasional glimpses of the horrible sight before me. The figure had abandoned his dark robes and risen to a massive height, uncoiling a horribly mangled body beneath his masked face. The skin was wretched tight upon a gaunt body, and was the same sickly green as the arms. The spine seemed to have a horrible twist in it. As the creature could not stand up straight, it now towered over me, and again the booming voice filled the room. I could not recognize what it said. It almost seemed to be in another language. As I watched, the room around me seemed to burst into flames. Smoke lunged upward from the now flaming furniture and quickly filled the small concrete room. By pure instinct, I bolted toward the exit. I heard a laughing behind me, and no doubt that awful teacher reclaimed what was his. Thank God I made it out in time. I have never encountered the creature, but I can't help but wonder, now that it has what it came for, will it leave?